podcast, and it features Michael Wolff.
Right, Wolff, who apparently spent quite a bit of time around both Epstein and Donald Trump.
Exactly. So our mission here is to, pull out the key insights, the nuggets of knowledge from Wolff's pretty unique perspective.
See if we can unearth some surprising facts, maybe raise some new questions about a story a lot of people think they've got figured out.
Yeah, maybe they don't.
And what's really interesting here, I think, is how this discussion, Wolff's discussion, it tackles recent developments, but also it kind of challenges the conventional narratives we hear. We'll be digging into like the official statements versus the doubts that still linger, the powerful people connected to Epstein, just the whole nature of his very enigmatic world.
It feels like a journey right into the heart of a saga that, honestly, it just keeps captivating people, keeps confusing people.
Absolutely. It makes you ask, how much of this whole thing do we really get?
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. The deep dive begins with that pretty big announcement from the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi.
Right, the DOJ. Our source says they basically came out and stated, look, no more Epstein files are going to be released.
Okay, no more files.
No client list. That's a big one people were looking for.
Huge.
And they concluded Jeffrey Epstein definitely committed suicide, full stop. Putting an end, officially at least, to all those murder theories.
Okay. Definitive. But here's where it gets really interesting, according to the source.
The timing,
this DOJ statement. It dropped exactly 6 years to the day that Epstein was arrested at Teterboro Airport, July 6th, 2019.
6 years. That's precise.
It is. And Wolff apparently reveals that Epstein actually called him just before that arrest happened.
Oh, Wolff, what for?
To set up breakfast for the very next morning.
A breakfast that obviously.
Breakfast that never happened, of course.
So this official statement, what's the context? Why now and why so definitive?
Well, that's a key question, isn't it?
Our source kind of digs into that. It mentions Pam Bondi, who made the announcement. Apparently, she was the second choice for the job after Matt Gaetz, reportedly.
Okay.
And she was supposedly told her job was, and this is a quote, to carry water for the president of the United States. Not really to act as an independent AG.
That's quite a framing for the role.
It contrasts pretty sharply with, figures like Jeff Sessions or even Bill Barr, that whatever you think of them, at least kept up a sort of public appearance of independence.
Right. There was at least that pretense. So if the DOJ is being this firm, this conclusive, what does that mean for the people who are really pushing those conspiracy theories?
Oh, yeah. The source points to figures like Kash Patel, Donald Bongino, folks who were really loud about demanding the Epstein files, demanding that client list.
They were front and center on that.
And now the source says they're kind of hoist by their own petard.
Hey, okay, explain that phrase for listeners.
It basically means, their own arguments or demands have kind of backfired on them. The very DOJ they might look to has issued this really firm conclusion that contradicts what they were pushing for.
So their own efforts kind of blew up in their face.
In a manner of speaking, yeah. Shows how public figures can get tangled in the narratives they help create.
Okay. So moving from the official statements, let's shift gears to maybe the most controversial connection that Wolff talks about in this source.
The Trump-Epstein relationship.
Exactly. According to Michael Wolff, these two guys were, and I'm quoting here, joined at the hip for a good 15 years.
15 years, that's a long time.
Very long time. Doing, quote, everything together, which included pursuing and hunting women, sharing at least one girlfriend for a whole year, apparently, using each other's planes. Epstein even supposedly advised Trump on how to cheat on his taxes.
Wow. That's incredibly detailed.
It is. Wolff goes so far as to say they kind of loved each other, that they were brothers in arms.
Brothers in arms. That is a very strong description.
It really is. And it's sort of backed up, in a way, by Steve Bannon. Bannon knew both of them well, right?
Yeah, Bannon was close to both.
And he reportedly told Epstein during the 2016 campaign, "You are the only person I was afraid of," because Bannon thought Epstein had the goods on Trump.
So Bannon saw Epstein as a potential threat to the campaign because of what he might know about Trump.
That's what the source claims Wolff is relaying. So what do you make of this picture Wolff paints, this deep intimacy, especially when Trump himself has, tried to downplay how close they were?
Well, if you look at the bigger picture, what Wolff describes, it really throws light on that tension we sometimes see, doesn't it?
Which tension?
You know how the MAGA base often pushes Epstein conspiracy theories that focus on Democrats, high-profile Democrats?
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
But they seem to kind of overlook or maybe ignore what Wolff calls Epstein's closest relationship in life, the one with Donald Trump.
It definitely complicates that narrative. Yeah.
It really does. And it makes you wonder, okay, if they were so incredibly close, like brothers, why did the friendship end? What happened?
The source actually addresses that directly. Wolff says the break happened in 2004.
Okay, 2004. Over what?
A real estate deal. Apparently, Trump went behind Epstein's back. There was this house in Palm Beach Epstein thought he had locked down.
Yeah.
Epstein bid $36 million. Trump came in over the top, behind his back apparently, bid $40 million, and got it.
Ouch. So Trump snaked him on a house deal.
That's the story Wolff tells. A pretty dramatic end to a supposed brotherly bond.
Definitely sounds like it. And then fast forward, what about Trump's reaction when Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested?
Right. Wolff talks about that too. Publicly, Trump said, she's a very nice woman. I wish her well. Kind of minimizing things.
I remember that comment.
But behind the scenes, according to Wolff, Trump was actually very wary, asking things like, what could she say? What would she say? And even, should he pardon her?
So concern behind the public face. That fits.
And then there's this other little detail, kind of a side note, but intriguing, about Bill Barr.
The Attorney General. What about him?
Well, Barr's father was the headmaster at the Dalton School, and he's the one who hired Jeffrey Epstein to teach there, even though Epstein didn't have a college degree.
Oh, right. I've heard that connection before.
Yeah.
That's how Epstein got into that world, partly.
Exactly. But then, after leaving Dalton, Barr's father apparently wrote a book about sex and space.
Wait, about sex and space? Seriously?
That's what the source says Wolff mentioned, calling it, quote, the stuff of which conspiracies are made.
I mean, yeah. That's just, wow. Only in this story, like you said.
Wild.
Okay, so all this background, these connections, it inevitably leads us back to the biggest, most enduring mystery of all.
How did Epstein actually die?
Exactly. And the source reveals something pretty personal from Wolff on this. He believes he got the last message from Epstein before he died.
The very last one. How?
It was the Friday evening before Epstein died on Saturday morning, August 10th. Wolff had asked, through one of Epstein's lawyers, how he was doing.
And Epstein replied.
Yes, via the lawyer. The message was, still hanging around.
Still hanging around. Oh, wow. Given what happened.
Exactly. Wolff notes it was very in character for Epstein. His comments were always, kind of amusing, unserious, ironic.
Heavy with irony, the source says.
Very heavy. And Wolff adds that the specific phrase, hanging himself, was kind of already in the air because Epstein had apparently made that attempt just a week before.
Chilling. So, okay, given that message, given everything, what's Wolff's personal conclusion? Does he buy the official suicide ruling?
This is where it gets really paradoxical. He says, flat out, he doesn't believe Epstein could have killed himself in the way that the conclusion is that he would have had to have killed himself.
Meaning the physical mechanics, like breaking his own neck in that specific way.
Essentially, yes. He finds the physical mechanics, as officially described, unbelievable.
But there's always a but with this story.
Always. He also says he doesn't believe that something nefarious happened in the sense of like a murder plot.
Why not?
His reasoning is that too many people would have known. He figures, half a dozen U.S. attorneys and at least as many FBI agents were close enough to the situation. He doesn't think they all would have just kept quiet if it was murder.
So let me get this straight. He thinks Epstein couldn't have killed himself the way they say he did.
Correct.
But he also thinks he wasn't murdered.
Precisely.
Huh.
It's a powerful paradox, isn't it? Epstein could not have killed himself as described and could not have been murdered.
So what's left?
Wolff basically admits it, he says. I have no idea how he died.
Wow. Just no idea. Coming from someone who knew him, who got that last message, that's quite something.
It really underscores the mystery. Even someone that close is left just baffled. And that mystery, Wolff suggests, is deepened by Ghislaine Maxwell just staying silent.
Taking a 20-year prison sentence instead of talking.
Right. Wolff kind of implies she knows too much. That she wouldn't pass up a get-out-of-jail ticket unless the alternative, talking, was somehow worse or impossible for her.
Okay, so beyond the death itself, the transcript, Wolff's count, it opens up this other window into Epstein's world. these salons.
Yeah, this part is pretty wild. Apparently back in 2014, Epstein actually asked Wolff if he'd be interested in writing a book about her.
A biography, authorized.
Seems like it. And to facilitate that, Epstein gave him access to his huge house on the Upper East Side, supposedly the largest private house in Manhattan.
Okay. And what did Wolff find there?
He describes this scene, the kind of ongoing discussion or salon that happened almost every single day.
A salon? Like intellectuals gathering?
Exactly. And a guest list. It was just extraordinary. Really prominent people from all sorts of fields.
Like who? Give us some names the source mentored.
Okay, get this. Bill Gates. Wolff says he met Gates there. Peter Thiel. Larry Summers. Ehud Barak, the former Israeli PM.
Barack was there. Didn't he have some weird request?
Yeah. The source notes he famously asked for a boiled egg with caviar.
Classy. Who else?
Steve Bannon was there too. Joe Iatto from MIT. Idris Daly, the CEO of Barclays at the time. Prince Andrew, naturally. Leon Black, the founder of Apollo Global Management.
An unbelievable list. Any others?
Noam Chomsky. And perhaps most surprisingly, the Dalai Lama.
Wait. The Dalai Lama was at Epstein's house salon? Did Wolff actually confirm that?
Wolff confirms he met the Dalai Lama there, yes. According to the source.
I have no words for that. It's just processing that image.
It's astonishing. And it leads to a really important point Wolff makes about why these people were there.
Yeah, because the common theory is blackmail, right? That Epstein had dirt on them.
Right. But Wolff pushes back on that, at least for these salon gatherings. He suggests these high-profile individuals weren't there because they were being forced or blackmailed.
So why were they there?
He says they came out of pure choice. They actually adored this guy, Epstein. They genuinely wanted to be there.
Adored him, despite everything else.
Apparently so in that context. Wolff describes them as people who didn't want to leave, who would stay there for meal after meal.
What were they talking about? Just gossip?
No, often really high-level stuff, public policy, global affairs. Wolff says the discussions provided incredibly valuable information. It was intellectually stimulating, powerful people networking and exchanging ideas.
So the draw was the access, the conversation, the influence in the room.
That's the picture Wolff paints. A seductive mix of intellectual excitement and proximity to power.
Okay, but this inevitably brings up the other side of Epstein. What about the young women? Were they at these salons?
Wolff addresses that. He says he did see young women there, yes, likely in their 20s.
And what was their role? Were they part of the intellectual discussions?
He describes them more as assistants or even room decorations, fluttering around the edges, he says, but not really central to the main conversations happening between the powerful guests.
And importantly, did he see any evidence of the stuff Epstein was later convicted of? Filming, blackmail, underage girls at these events?
At these specific gatherings in the New York house or the Paris house he visited, Wolff says no. He never saw evidence of filming or blackmail in that context. And he says he never sensed the women present at those specific salons were underage.
Okay, that's an important distinction he's making about those specific locations and events he witnessed.
A very important distinction, which then brings us to maybe the other core mystery, besides his death.
The money, where did it all come from?
Exactly. Our source highlights this as clearly a mystery, and probably essential mystery. Wolff actually recounts Epstein explaining his own wealth in a very Epstein way.
How did Epstein describe it?
He told Wolff he ran a reverse Ponzi scheme.
A reverse Ponzi? What does that even mean? A normal Ponzi makes fake money look real.
Right. Epstein claimed his method did the opposite. It made real money seem like it didn't exist, making it disappear from the system, essentially.
How would that work? Did he give an example?
Yeah, the example Wolff relays is this. Say a really wealthy guy is getting a divorce. If Epstein can help him hide, say, $100 million from the settlement.
The guy saves maybe $50 million he would have had to pay out.
Exactly. And Epstein's cut. According to Epstein himself, he gets half of that. So $25 million in that example for making money vanish.
Wow. Making money that does exist seem like it doesn't exist. That's a chillingly clever, if true, description of financial maneuvering.
Definitely paints a picture of operating deep within the gray areas or maybe the black areas of international finance. Clearly a central mystery, like the source says.
And speaking of things being hidden or reluctant to come out, Wolff also touches on the media, doesn't he?
He does. He talks about the media's maybe reluctance to cover the Epstein story fully beyond the initial narrative.
What does he mean by that?
He suggests that most media, certainly established media outlets, have been very, very reluctant to deal with this story more deeply.
Oh, what's the fear?
Fear of getting in trouble, perhaps, or saying the wrong thing about such a complex and sensitive topic involving so many powerful people.
And he has a specific take on the focus on the victims.
Yeah, he notes the current focus, what he calls the so-called victims narrative, which is a controversial framing. Obviously, he claims it largely stems from depositions.
Depositions where money was involved.
Where, yes, financial rewards were potentially significant, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars, he suggests. He claims this financial aspect fueled that specific narrative, even saying Epstein ended up supporting the South Florida bar through all the legal action.
That's a pretty cynical take on the victim settlement.
It is. It's Wolff's perspective as relayed in the source. However, Wolff does acknowledge, importantly, that Epstein absolutely had a fairly discreet or secret part of his life.
The part involving abuse.
Yes, devoted to, quote, a serious fetishism abuse.
He acknowledges that existed, but perhaps outside the direct view of many people in his other circles, like those salon guests.
So compartmentalization, the abuse happening separately from the high-flying intellectual salons.
That seems to be the picture Wolff paints, based on what he observed.
Man, this whole deep dive, it really does leave you with more questions than answers, doesn't it? Just like Wolff himself kind of admitted about the death.
Absolutely. You go from the DOJ saying, okay, book closed on these key issues.
Right, definitive statement.
To the lingering, profound paradox of how he actually died. And then you have this almost surreal world of his salons, these incredibly powerful people just hanging out.
It really defies easy explanations, the whole thing. The layers just keep peeling back, but the core stays murky.
And if you think about the bigger picture, the broader implications, it's such a stark reminder, isn't it? About power dynamics.
How so? Just what happens when massive wealth, information, influence, when it all converges with secrecy. It really forces you to think about how narratives get shaped. Who shapes them? What really motivates everyone involved?
Even the people who might just claim they were on the periphery, you mean?
Exactly. It raises questions about willful ignorance or the allure of proximity to power, even when that power is deeply compromised.
So, wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Well, it's a pretty fascinating, if disturbing, look at how these complex, powerful figures operate.
Yeah, and how official stories get constructed. How some mysteries just seem to resist being solved no matter what.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In a world with such extreme power, such privilege, how much of the real truth is ever truly knowable?
And maybe, what stories are we, as the public, sort of implicitly agreeing to accept or believe just because they're the simplest narrative available?
A lot to think about there.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Epstein mystery through the lens of Michael Wolff's account. We hope you feel, well, maybe not clearer, but perhaps better informed about the different facets of this.
And maybe, a little more curious too.